Hey everyone, it's Miss Joyce. Today we'll be learning about numerical expressions involving decimals. Let's start by reviewing the order of operations. This is the order we solve equations in. We can use the mnemonic device GEMS to help us remember the order. The G stands for grouping symbols, such as parentheses and brackets. So whenever we see parentheses or brackets, we always solve what is inside of those grouping symbols first. After, we're going to move on to the E, which stands for exponents. An example of an exponent might be 10 to the power of 2. Remember, exponents with the base is the number that we're multiplying, and the exponent on top tells us how many times to multiply it. So 10 to the power of 2 would be 10 times 10, or 100. After we solve everything inside the grouping symbols and all the exponents, we move on to the M, which stands for both multiplication and division. If you see multiplication and division in the same problem, you solve this going left to right, just as like we were reading a sentence. After we solve all the multiplication and division, we move on to the S, which stands for subtraction and addition. Same thing, if there's subtraction and addition in the problem, we would solve going from left to right. Let's use GEMS to help us find the first step that we would take in each of these problems. In A, we have 2 times 1 and 6 tenths plus 3 and 4 tenths. Let's use GEMS to help us. Let's first see if there's any grouping symbols in problem A. We can see there are parentheses here. So we are going to solve what is inside the parentheses first. So the first step we would do is 1 and 6 tenths plus 3 and 4 tenths. Now let's move on to B. First, we're going to see if there are any grouping symbols. In problem B, we can see there are no grouping symbols. So let's move on to the E, which stands for exponents. We can see there is an exponent here, 10 to the power of 2. So that's the first thing we would solve. Remember, 10 to the power of 2 is 10 times 10, which is 100. So after we found this is 100, then we would subtract 160 and 5 tenths minus 100. Finally, with problem C, we're going to see if there's any grouping symbols. We see there's no grouping symbols, so we can move on to the E, which stands for exponents. We see that there are no exponents. So now we can move on to the M, which stands for multiplication and division. We can see in problem C, there is multiplication right here. So we are going to solve 1 and 5 tenths times 4 first. We'll get that answer and then add it to 6 and 5 tenths. All right, so now let's try rewriting these expressions as numerical expressions, which means we're using just numbers and operations. Here we have 4 times the difference between 5 and 4 tenths and 1 and 4 tenths. Well, 4 times is multiplication. So we're going to do 4 and then the multiplication sign. Now it says the difference. Well, we know the difference is subtraction, but we know difference is the answer to a subtraction problem. So we're going to be subtracting 5 and 4 tenths minus 1 and 4 tenths. We got those numbers from the problem. But in order to find the answer to this part of the problem first and then multiply it, we need to put these numbers in parentheses. This allows us to do 5 and 4 tenths minus 1 and 4 tenths first, and then we'll multiply. So let's go ahead and find that value, which means finding the answer. So first we're going to subtract 5 and 4 tenths minus 1 and 4 tenths, which gets us 4. Now that we found the answer to the subtraction portion, we can multiply that by 4, since that's what's in the start here. 4 times 4 is 16. So the value of this expression is 16. Let's try number 2. The sum of 10 and 85 hundredths and 4 and 15 hundredths times 2. Well, we know the sum is the answer to an addition problem. So we're going to be adding 10 and 85 hundredths and 4 and 15 hundredths. We're going to get that answer first, and then we'll multiply it by 2. So in order to get the answer to this first, we need to put that in parentheses. Times means we're multiplying, and we're multiplying by 2. So now let's find the value. First, we're going to add 10 and 85 hundredths plus 4 and 15 hundredths, which is going to get 15. we're going to multiply the answer 15 from what we got in the parentheses times 2, and that gets us 30. So the value of this expression is 30. Let's try one more problem. Here we have the sum of 3/8 and 5/8 minus 2. So the sum, remember, is the answer to an addition problem. So we know we're going to be adding. We'll be adding 3/8, which is 3 groups of 8, or 3 times 8. On the other side of the addition problem, we have 5/8, or 5 groups of 8, which is the same as 5 times 8. Finally, we're going to be subtracting 2. So what we'll do is we are first going to be multiplying, because if you think of gems, we can see there's no grouping symbols, there's no exponents, but there is multiplication. So let's do the multiplication part first. 3 times 8 is 24. Now we can do the second grouping of multiplication. 5 times 8 is 40. Everything else has stayed the same. We have the addition sign where it was, and we're going to be subtracting 2 at the end. We can see now there's no more multiplication or division, so we can move on to subtraction and addition. Well, here we see there's both addition and subtraction in the problem, so we're going to be doing this from left to right just if we were reading a sentence. Since the addition comes first, we're going to add 24 plus 40 to get 64. Now we can subtract 2. So 64 minus 2 is 62. The value of this expression is 62. Now let's try rewriting these numerical expressions in words. Here we're going to be finding the answer to this addition part first, and then we're going to be multiplying by 6. So remember, the word we can use for finding the answer to an addition problem is finding the sum. So we are writing down here in words the sum of, and then we list the two numbers that we're adding, 2 and 4/10 plus 1 and 6/10. Then it says we're going to be multiplying by 6. So afterwards, we can put times 6. Now let's solve this. Using gems, we're going to first start with the grouping symbols. We'll solve 2 and 4/10 plus 1 and 6/10 first, since that's inside the grouping symbol. 2 and 4/10 plus 1 and 6/10 is 4. Now we can multiply that answer times 5. 4 times 5 is 20. So the value of this expression is 20. Let's try another problem. Here we have 100 times, and then we're going to find the answer. We're going to be multiplying it by the answer of 10 and 7/10 minus 4 and 7/10. So here, start at the beginning, we have 100 times. So we'll write that down in words. Now remember, the answer to a subtraction problem is known as the difference. So we're going to write at the bottom that we're going to be multiplying 100 times the difference, or the answer to the subtraction problem, between 10 and 7/10 and 4 and 7/10. Let's go ahead and solve this. First, using gems, we're going to solve what's inside the grouping symbols first. 10 and 7/10 minus 4 and 7/10 is 6. And now we can multiply that answer by 100. So 100 times 6 is 600. The value of this expression is 600. All right, let's do this last problem together. Here we have 10 times 2, and we're going to add the answer of that to 8 times 2. Another way we can say 10 times 2 is 10 twos. We're going to be adding this answer, so we can use the word plus, and we're going to be adding that to the answer of 8 times 2, or 8 twos. Let's go ahead and find the value of this expression. First, let's start with the grouping symbols. Since there's two sets of grouping symbols, we'll go from left to right. 10 times 2 is 20. And we're going to be adding that to 8 times 2, which is 16. 20 plus 16 is 36. So the value of this expression is 36.